good evening and welcome to the Town of Hillsborough meeting for December. It's the only meeting of the town board this month. And I will not read the public charge, but it is in the printed agenda, both here and in the online version as well. Sarah, do we have anyone signed up for comments? Okay, thank you. Regarding agenda changes and approval, I had one suggestion for the agenda. Does anybody else have any changes to the agenda? Okay, I would like to add item 7B, ETJ discussion, and get your feedback on that for the North Carolina League of Municipalities. Is there a motion to?
You to agree that. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And we're on to number 4, presentations. And Jen Del Valle, tell us all about the Leading the Way Award. again.
Yes, good evening. All right, let me get this out here. A little bit heavy.
11 pounds, right?
11 pounds. So the Leading the Way Award recognizes outstanding achievement in local government service delivery. The most recent award cycle represented top achievement among participants of the Direction Finder survey from January to June 2024. And award recipients rank in the top 10% of cities and counties across the United States in 3 core areas that are evaluated in the survey. The first one is satisfaction with overall quality of services. Second is satisfaction with customer service provided by employees. And then the third core area is satisfaction with the value residents think they receive for the local taxes and fees. And so I'm really proud to present this 11-pound award to the town board this evening. It's our second time receiving the award, and the second time that we were, since they've created the program, that we are eligible. So we've received it both years. And I think it's a testament to the excellent work of our town staff, as well as the support that you all as the town board provide to us as we carry out this important work. And so, yes, keeping it just short and sweet, we will keep this over at Town Hall for and proudly display it, but just wanted to officially present it to the town board and recognize this achievement with our results from the community survey.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, it sure is a testament to our staff and all the good work and attention to detail and all that you do to help improve and support our residents and visitors. So thank you very much. And I think if you can leave the award out there, we can all look at it somewhere, maybe take a picture later. So
Just don't drop it on your foot.
you break a foot.
Great, congratulations.
Okay, number 5, appointments. We have recommendation to appoint Daniel Wildis to the HDC and David Bangford to the Board of Adjustment. Is there a motion?
Move to approve both appointments as presented.
Thank you, Evelyn. I think I heard, well, I'm sorry. Thank you, Kathleen. I heard Evelyn give a second as well.
Yeah, a second.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those appointments are made. And on to the consent agenda. What's the wish of the board?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Kathleen.
A second.
Thank you, Rob. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Awesome. Moving right along to our one of 2 items for decision. The first one is a discussion about community reinvestment program review. And Emily.
If it's okay, I'll share a few comments to tee it up for Emily. It's the budget team had identified probably about a year ago. Oh, thank you. The budget team had identified about a year ago that we wanted to make some improvements to our nonprofit process for a variety of reasons. One is like, it might not seem like a lot, but they have a hard time keeping up with all the administrative paperwork and following up of doing it. So that was an internal reason for wanting to do it. And just seeing a trend of there being more organizations coming to the town board, requesting funds. So anyway, those were the two main reasons, and budget staff, and then the mayor had shared some similar comments several months ago. And I shared it with budget team, and they came to me and said, can we put this off till next year because we're buried and workload is a problem, and a lot of times we do that. And then the mayor and I talked about it, and I guess from what the direction he shared was like, there's just too much coming in the queue. Can the staff at least get it started? We don't have to get everything done immediately, but do something incremental. So what you're gonna see tonight is not like a super polished finished product. It was Emily and Josh doing a lot of work to just trying to get a rough draft, get us started. Hopefully we can step through by the retreat and then have some direction from the board and get a new updated process.
During a retreat, we had talked about, and a couple times, well, both before and after, about putting a priority on requests for the basic needs, you know, if you think of Maslow's pyramid, your basic needs are most vulnerable, to give priority to those needs. Is that a part of this, or is that part of future
I can
discussion?
answer that.
Oh, okay.
And that is considered we're gonna talk about that, so
Okay.
later down, there's a question about, do we want to put some kind of guardrails or framework around how to prioritize those things? And that was one of the motivating factors for that. So,
Thank you.
Yes.
I didn't want to get too far. I knew that was in there, but I wasn't sure to what extent that was going to be a discussion item now or a discussion item later. So appreciate it.
And the other, when I forgot, I knew there was three things, and I'm always forgetting something as far as the reasons, wanting to make sure the way we're managing nonprofits aligns with best practices. And while we're a small community, we know everybody. If we regularly share information about problems in organizations and local governments with fraud and issues. I know there's been organizations in Hillsborough, not the town of Hillsborough, that have had these. So we need to come up with practices that protect us, don't put us in that situation, because it happens everywhere all the time. So best practices are an important thing, but trying to be, we can't do everything overnight, being able to work our way up there. So anyway, that's just sort of the quick kickoff, and I'm happy to toss it to Emily. So, thank you.
All right, so I thought that one potential way to go through this is to go through the policy section by section and see if anyone has any comments, feedback, other direction for each section. And at the end, there are a series of in the agenda abstract, there are a series of key eligibility or funding considerations. And some of those we may touch as we go through the different sections. And then once we go through the policy, if there's any remaining, we'll kind of review that list and pick up any that we may have missed. Does that sound like that'll work?
That works for me. Is that okay for everyone?
All right. All right, so getting started. With the draft, we have the purpose statement. Is there any?
Just a moment, I'm still
Sure.
getting to the page number. That's too long.
And again, recognizing that this is just a draft and this is just getting the conversation started. It may be that a week or a month from now, you have a thought on something. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. All right, now I'm here.
No questions on the purpose statement?
All right, moving on to the policy itself. The first bullet is the policy statement.
Policy statement And when I read through this, I didn't come up with any specific questions, but as I just glanced through it again, just for clarification. The funding that is given out by the tourism board, the TDA, and organizations like that. According to this policy, we would still look, I'm trying to give an example, like the Birdwell School gets funds from the tourism board. So they could also apply again for this community reinvestment, is what we're saying in this policy, correct? But just the lower funding priority would be given to them. And that would probably be part of the scoring worksheet or something, correct?
I think too. I think it makes a difference on, you know, just monies from other funding sources in general, not necessarily, I mean, definitely for town. Sorry, is that, I mean, town being priority so that we're not essentially double dipping in two different directions, but if we get an assistance, you know, a request. I am making this up, that it's just getting a lot of funding from. I don't know, it's like they're, it's not, it's a difference between survival funding, fundamental funding, nice to have funding, you know, it's, and I don't know how to frame that, but, it's that funding sources and the purpose, the need.
From the organizations.
Yeah, the
Kind of.
organizational need and,
I'm thinking, and I could be wrong about what you're saying, but is that more like, capital funding for these organizations versus program funding?
Well, you know,
Or like
is it-
keeping them going, or?
exactly,
Or
is it,
just?
is it capital, is it, and
Or
these
capacity,
organizations do need capacity and they do need operational funding and. I don't believe in artificial percentage because it's just. It's not accurate or. Effective, but, you know, looking at. What that, you know, what the funding streams are. Or is their funding streams, you know, broad? Is it narrow where they're only getting funding streams from one or two sources? So I don't know, I don't know exactly the right language.
May I ask a question to help maybe clarify? that?
Yes,
That is, are you wanting to know, for example, if someone's applying to the town to this fund for something, you're wanting to know, are they applying for the same thing from other organizations?
Right.
Or do they have 50 other funders and we're just 51st? That's,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
The tourism board does ask in the questionnaire, like where your other funding streams coming from. But they're more program based.
Right.
Like we're asking for this funding for X program. Where else are you getting your funds to fund that one part of the program? Not their, whatever else they might be doing, but just that one program.
Cause it gives us a better picture of their funding sources, the revenue streams, how stable the organization is. You know, we certainly, you know, want to make sure we're helping our most vulnerable. And we don't want to throw good money after bad.
you know, is there another place in the policy where that might help address that?
There is a section under the application process that lists all the different pieces of information that agencies will need to provide and funding, their funding sources or places that they are seeking funding. They would be asked to list all of those.
And I have to go back down because I don't have the pieces memorized. Are we asking about the leverage? Or, you know, how the funds are being leveraged and their expected leverage?
I guess we're asking what the funding would be used for, and specifically like what program and then how much it would cost them.
No, it's so if, you know, is the funding that's being asked of us going to be used to leverage dollars? So, you know, so example, matching funds, you know, there's some organizations that each dollar is being leveraged 10x. Others, it's, you know, 2x. But they have a good idea generally of what that leverage is. But that also gives us insight to of how, you know, the role of the funding.
That makes sense to be able to add language to.
We can add that.
For sure.
And I'm thinking of things that especially if we, it's not if, when we get way more applications than we have funding. Questions that give us relevant information to help us prioritize.
Other questions about the policy statement? Matt, yes.
Emily, can you clarify, the sentence about request for funding for direct staffing costs, being given a lower priority?
I think it's trying to get it, providing more, getting more of that service or more of a service as opposed to just general overhead cost, I think that's what this is getting at.
I actually have an issue with that because,
Can I have my time,
I'm
please?
sorry.
Thank you. One of the things that we, ran through with, the tourism board, and it may have come up in your budget cycle as well, Megan, this time, was on the Chamber of Commerce and doing the holiday parade, for example, and needing additional funds because it does take staff time to implement a program. And sometimes that direct staffing cost, I can understand if there's existing staff, but to put on some of these programs, you might have overtime, you might have to hire a contractor or a consultant, you might have to bring on a seasonal or temporary employee. And the cost of implementing any program does have, yeah, there's always ways to build in and kind of mask it. What the funds are going to be used for on a staffing side, but I wouldn't want someone to look at our policy and say, there's no way I can implement this just on volunteer time or existing staff time. It has to come from somewhere else. And if they're nonprofits, they're not out there, they're not making widgets to sell. They really are using their time to put on something. There's not something necessarily to take home at the end of the day. And so what I would just suggest is maybe instead of saying direct staffing costs, requests for funding for like general overhead or administrative cost or something that's not clear. Ultimately, it's going to be, a lot of someone's personnel time to do it, including turning in any reports back into y'all about how the funds were spent.
Okay.
Matt, can I ask you a clarification? Yeah. On that, and Emily, this might get to the same general question is, were you thinking perhaps that we wouldn't want to be asked to fund the sole position for an organization, that we would be on hook to support the core of that institution for, into the future, because these grants may be time limited and that would be an inappropriate use?
Correct.
The money,
Yes.
does that kind of get at that where it's appropriate to
Yeah.
use it for the programmatic aspect or share of it,
Right.
but not primary staff?
Right. I think if we could just make that clarification, that'd be
Yeah.
good. Thank you. I'm sorry, I had a question, I needed you, and then I had some feedback, so my
No,
apologies.
oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm all good. That actually helped clarify, although I'm not opposed to funding staff only because it is so often funds are restricted. And one of the challenges of nonprofit effectiveness is ensuring they can have the salaries, they can hire, they can train, those fundamental things. And if there's so much restricted funds, they get left where they're not able to. And then it gets into a cycle that's not healthy. So I actually don't oppose funding, supporting core staff or admin staff. While I do agree, it would not be the sole source.
I think there might be consensus on that one.
I'll add this for, I think part of going the direction of not funding like general overhead, but like trying to direct it more toward like programmatic related expenses is that kind of with the information included in the packet about the funding the chamber or similar type organizations, and if it's just general overhead, we may be funding things that maybe we're not legally allowed to fund. And so I think sort of tailoring it toward specific programs or services allows it to kind of stay in the lane that we're allowed to fund.
Can we do so in a way that we include language that stipulates that, whether it's core admin, whatever the general overhead or programmatic, those activities must be directed on town interest? I mean, that way it's certainly not going to be, I can't imagine anything would be sole source, and it underscores the fiduciary responsibility that the money that they get from us is used for us.
And maybe even align with our comprehensive sustainability.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
actually what I was just gonna say,
Yes.
it's like something in the policy to say, what strategic goal perhaps is this program aiming to help our town achieve?
Yeah,
And I think that's kind of in the policy statement, but I'm sure.
but I think it would be helpful if it was clarified specifically, because it also calls for them to understand a comprehensive and sustainability plan.
Oh, yeah.
Any other comments on this section? Okay.
All right, next up is general funding assistance.
Whoa, thanks. Okay.
One question. Now we're talking about agencies rather than organizations.
It's the same, yeah. Maybe
It
clarify.
should be good. On the final
Consistency in
draft, it should
language.
be consistent.
Yes.
I think this also speaks to that, you know, the permanent personnel or ongoing expenses, again, it's within that umbrella, it's got to support, be spent on their activities. Town specific.
Yeah, maybe whatever language you come up with for the first part.
Or,
you can
yeah,
just
it
use
applies
that
to this,
again and
yeah.
again.
Yeah, because that priority will be given to applications most closely aligned to the Board of Commissioners' priorities. Makes me think of a strategic plan that would be
Right.
what our priorities would be.
Any other questions about that section?
Do we need to have a vote of general consensus or just a vote? Because it sounds to me that's like a head nodding versus an actual motioned vote. On that last sentence.
Yeah, that's an awkward phrase.
It
Yeah,
is.
they duly approved by the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't we,
Yeah, wouldn't this be within our budget approval? Would it be? I know we did it like right after, so it was a motion last time we did this.
yeah,
I think
everything
it's
that's
yeah.
with that
separate.
motion, so doesn't it need to, at least because I read that and it sounds like
It's just a,
head nodding versus an actual
Mhm.
vote, and I'm thinking, wouldn't we get in a little hot water? If it was spending money without a vote?
okay, any other questions about this section? Sorry, it's gonna be a long night. I'm trying to move sufficiently through this conversation.
Okay, next section is funding amount. And in this one, it does touch on the basis of allocation, and there are, if you want to decide that tonight, that's an option, or if you want to think about it and or decide on basis, but maybe not decide the specifics of what that looks like. You know, we get that conversation can go multiple different ways, but just want to point that out.
Should we pause here and then just have a brief conversation about that methodology? Just going through my notes for him. Comments. Yeah, so in the document, we talked about per capita allocation, percent of budget. general fund expenditures or what the tax rate equivalent might be of that. But whatever formula we come up with, we need to, I think we need to make that into a dollar amount for the current budget year estimated so that our organizations will understand we have $100,000 to spend total shared among all these things. But if we give them percentages of this and tax equivalent to that, that's confusing.
That's confusing, but
But that's gonna help us come up with the dollar amount. that we
right. What I'm thinking though is, because I know how we have surprises and depending on what happens with long session and some of the monkeying even in the next few votes, General Assembly, which will impact potentially. I'm a little queasy about naming a percentage right now because I always want to hear what's the state of the budget from Eric and from you, Emily, so that even if we have a number, but we're facing something that's not healthy, I don't want to be bound by that and put ourselves in a worse position. So I don't know if it's a matter of timing, maybe. Or,
Yeah, I'm thinking that if we had a general policy that we tried to adhere to, it creates transparency year after year of what our organization can expect. I think we have the ability to flex to that, but here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna set a number and then we will deviate from it year after year after year. And it'll just be up and down all over the map and it'll be hard to say no to all the needs that come out there. We need to come up with some kind of general guidance which we can fund in that, as opposed to just a change every year that's dramatic. And whatever that is, we can say, 1% equals whatever dollar amount that is. And that's the general target.
yeah, I'm okay with if we change year to year. It's the timing of when we change year to year that I'm more concerned with to give nonprofits enough heads up. I'm a little, like I said, a little queasy about.
Yeah, in terms of our budget cycle process, Eric, when we have our budget retreat, that's when we come up with, that's when we see the first estimates, right, for revenue and expenditures.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think, dating back, we were the earliest local government in the state to provide detailed estimates in most cases. A lot of times we'll do I'll provide an overview either at the end of January or this year, maybe the end of February, with some updates based on submissions that staff have done and everything like that. And it's pretty early, usually even by the 1st of March, I may have an idea trend wise how it's looking, but until you sit there and grind through how many over 1,000 line items we've got, it takes a while to have some sort of level of confidence, right, Sheriff? And I'll say this, and maybe it was the same thing the mayor just said. I think if you did have a target amount, with the understanding, in extreme situations that we may have to throttle back, just like we sometimes have eliminated positions, during the year or taken other drastic action.
Okay, I'm okay, as long as we've got it's guideline and not carved in concrete where we.
That would be good.
I think there's consensus on that. Matt, you had a question on that point?
Well, not so much a question. I mean, I think that not locking us into a specific dollar figure, I think makes a lot of sense. But, what I kind of lean towards as kind of a middle ground is that percentage of the general fund budget, in part because as the town grows, as tax revenues grow, our expenditures are going to grow as well, and making sure that it's a roughly equivalent to what we're spending on other things. When I look at things like per capita allocation, I think that could get kind of dangerous. And I think that the tax rate equivalent is interesting, but that holds us in some way to two metrics, really. It's not just what do we set the tax rate at, but then we also have to look at what the property values are, in town as well. I'm going through this in real time as I think through it, and so I think comparing it to our other expenditures, I think keeps it in sync. It doesn't make us potentially spend more on a per capita allocation, plus I think some of the towns that use per capita are much larger than us. But not, I don't want anyone to think that we are intentionally setting aside a percentage of their property taxes. I think keeping it in line with the rest of the budget and figuring out what that sweet spot is. That way, as expenditures rise and fall, revenues rise and fall, it's going along with that, whatever that happens to be.
I like that. That makes sense. That removes queasy.
Percentage of general fund is a good approximation.
I think so.
Rob?
I was gonna say, I agree with that. I think it should be a percentage of the general fund, because I think for planning purposes, it gives an amount, that people, can plan to, have, based on the year.
Nice. And for everybody's information, on page 239 of the agenda packet, the first table in the packet lists those things at the bottom. And that, to me, that's the easiest to understand, the percent of the general fund expenditures, which is the second row from the bottom of the first table. It shows the difference over the years. 0.32, 0.38, 0.54, 0.44, and 0.62 in the current budget. There's quite a bit of variation there. But to your point, Kevin. Here.
Oh, I was just looking at the chart, and this may be one of these that my, you'll know I'm not a statistics major, but I may get this wrong. And, so if you use tax rate equivalent in, FY 21, it was 0.3. Now it's, in 25, it's up to 7/8 of a cent. So that's a 260% increase in the amount we will give to nonprofits in that 5 years. This is the part it gets fuzzy to me on percentages. I have to stop and think, because I have to think it through. But we go through 0.32% 5 years ago up to 0.62%. So that was only a 190% increase. So anyway, there was tax rate, went up by like a third more. But maybe if we start looking at the way, when you do percentages of percentages, sometimes that may not be accurate. But my point is that may be a less elastic gauge to support what Commissioner Hughes was suggesting. So.
Okay, any other comments or questions about the funding amount section? Do you think you got some good guidance from the conversation about
I think so. So what I'm hearing,
language choices that might make it easy to understand?
so what I'm hearing is that we're looking to do the percentage of general fund expenditures of the basis.
Yeah.
And then TBD on what that percentage is. Yeah, got it. And one of the things we'll have to look at, with any method that is selected, is more the nuances of how it would work, because, the budget isn't adopted until a certain point, but we may have already decided what our nonprofit funding is gonna be, so those numbers may not line up, or what the budget looks like in February may be different than June, and then every year, like as Commissioner Hughes said, the budget fluctuates, it goes up and down. There's capital expenditures that may increase the budget one year, but the next year that capital expenditure may not be present, and so the budget's lower. So it will have some ebb and flow to it, but we'll have to work on the logistics of it.
Can I ask one more question? Is there any value in putting in policy, basically, a organization will provide funding for 3 years or X number of years, but then they, aren't eligible for it, to allow other organizations or more people? I don't know. I'm just asking.
I'm not sure.
Tourism does that.
I'm not sure I understand. Can you read?
So, well, is there any value to to putting a limit on the number of years that we
Okay.
would essentially
Gotcha.
directly fund a program or an organization. And the reason I'm asking is we seem to have a lot of the same organizations that apply every year, that we fund. But that ties up all of our funds for, for that year. And, a new nonprofit that comes into town, or there's a new, need for something else. Again, I'm just asking to see what you'll.
Well, my feedback on that is, I know I kind of thought of this a couple times because the tourism board does limit the funding per organization. And I've wondered if perhaps maybe, and I don't know the answer, I don't exactly, I haven't settled on what I would like to see either, but perhaps it's a limit on the program that a nonprofit does. Like, maybe not, we're not funding the same program over and over again, but we might fund the same nonprofit over and over again. That might be something, but then, and again, I'm thinking about this as I speak, something like OCIM, when they are doing the water, relief fund, as long as, I guess, it's hitting our strategic goal and it's like checking the boxes that we want checked. I also kind of think that, yeah, they might get funding 5-10 years in a row, but they're also hitting our strategic plan. They're also making, like, as a board, it's our responsibility to make sure that they do that. And I think if a partner isn't doing that, then that new nonprofit that's applying, perhaps they're feeling that priority that we're not getting done by something else. So as I said, I kind of go back and forth on these term limits, but I'd love to hear what the rest of you have to say about that. But my 2 cents on it.
I'm sitting on the fence, but my immediate thought was that could snag what we do for Fairview and what we do for the museum, which I think would be a mistake. I tend to lean towards, how is it fulfilling? If we go back to, is it fulfilling our comprehensive strategic plan? And is it, looking at that Maslow hierarchy of needs, the most vulnerable, so that we're focusing there. And I do expect we're still going to have multiple providers serving the same people in similar ways, if not the same ways. And that's where, I'm thinking in terms of, that's where applying the leverage and the approach and the number of people, some of those types of things to start to prioritize. But I think since we are the source of the last resort, I'm a little squeamish. As I talk, I'm finding myself a little squeamish on the term limits, because then some of the folks may not have a place else to go.
That makes sense. I'm called Matt.
Yeah, to follow up on what Megan said, because I think we started that when I was on the tourism board. An organization come to us for something, and kind of the idea was that it could be potentially a seed funding for no more than 2 or 3 years, and then at that point, once there's a relationship and clearly an identified need, then maybe it needs to turn into a contract partnership, which is what we did the last 2 fiscal years. Well, you did it, and then we did it the year before, and I was on the board for the Chamber of Commerce for the holiday parade. And so that was one where at the time, Sarah had come and said, I can't do this with my member dollars because it's not helping my members directly. And it's really a service for the town, and the town really wants to see it. And that's how we got into that relationship. And oftentimes those things spin off. River Park Concert being a good example, where the seed funding was provided by the tourism board. They never got to the point of a contract partner because they knew it was kind of a temporary. There was a off ramp at some point, unless they wanted to enter into a more formal, relationship.
Right.
And I would also say that, one thing about it, the museum is different, and
So,
Stephanie can chime in on this, but the town pays the museum a lump sum every year, so the town itself does not have to manage a lot of the maintenance of the building.
right, so that
because-
would not fall under this then.
No,
What about with Fairview, with the communities?
That's not my, I won't know that one.
at least with the museum, I know that
And
one.
that's like, I'm thinking about the community center, the funding, Fairview Live, which is every other year. Some of these,
Yeah, the idea was they would fall under this umbrella.
yeah, that's, that I couldn't support pulling the rug under, Fairview Live and supporting in some way the community center.
Stephanie, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just to be clear, the museum is not the same thing because it's in the lease. The lease agreement, the contract that we
Okay.
have, the maintenance is worked out, where we're basically using our funds to maintain the building, but they manage the contract work.
Is that the same
So
thing with,
it's not that that is separate.
would that be
That
the
is
same?
not true of Fairview. Fairview comes under this umbrella. And it's not, I don't think that anyone's suggesting that Fairview wouldn't get money. I think they're just suggesting that the process of any of those nonprofits asking for money would have a clear process, right?
Yeah, cause I'm thinking that if it's a building lease, that's very similar for the
It's
community.
not, Fairview's using it for events for their own neighborhood. The museum is literally maintaining the building.
Yeah,
We maintain the building for Fairview. My department maintains the
Right,
Fairview
right.
building, but we don't do the
but that,
contract services for the museum.
right, but what I'm trying to get at, the town maintenance of the Fairview building, that does not come out of this.
Right, the money that the Fairview Community Watch is requesting is for their own operations and events.
Right,
Basic maintenance comes out of the town budget. The things that they have requested funding for enhancements to the building or programs. That is what staff is asking the board for feedback on. Do you want to treat that like the rest of these, or do you want an exemption? Staff's not able to make that decision.
Right,
That's
right.
why we're,
well, that's what I was trying to get a feel for, because I would like to see that exempted.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page,
Okay.
and does that make sense?
I just
Based
am
on
not very
conversation.
good at asking the right questions tonight.
Now, does Fairview, like, as an example, do they go through the entire application process, like turn in their, so this would be, with this process, there's a new hurdle that we're putting in front of them.
Yeah,
Okay. Just to make sure that's out there, thinking about it.
yeah, and that's another, I think if there, it's,
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation in this calendar year to help people get ready for
Yeah, for the next
potential
year.
change. Yeah. Okay, and Rob says that answers his question. Or the other questions on that section.
and thinking of, like I said, the Fairview Live and that's.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, can we just get some clarification for you all on exactly what you mean
Yeah.
on the Fairview? Because that's a big question for us on this policy. What is the board's consensus? Do you want Fairview Community Watch to be a part of this policy and this process? Or do you want them to be treated as a budget request, which is how we've done them traditionally?
I mean, I'd like to see it as a budget request.
It's a lot of money.
I'm sorry?
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly, which is why I'd like to see as a budget request rather than nonprofit.
Yes, more
Is that inclusive of the building and anything else?
Like this year, when they asked for extra, the extra money, I think it was 35, that, whatever that extra, that, I wouldn't, because it's part of that community center that we're fulfilling a long-standing promise, which is why I want to see that as part of a budget. It may not be the same amount because I'm making some assumptions, the needs will be different in some capacity building. But we, as a community, made that promise for them a long time ago, and for that thing, I can see,
Got it.
okay.
Can you imagine anything else like a one-off low dollar amount? Something that might go through this process as opposed to the standard budget process?
I'm thinking and I'm just making something up, if they've got, a one-off program or whatever that they wanted, that I would see coming through. But again, it would go through the lens of how does it fit with the, sustainability plan and our priorities.
Okay, so to put a fine point on it, on the top of page 239 of the agenda packet, from the table, first table at the top. of the
Here, let me go
page.
back to that.
Fairview Community Watch is the 4th item on that list.
$55,000 is a lot of money. No, I wouldn't. No, I'm not, because that 55,000, they asked, they originally they had, this year there was the 35 that came back with extra money. I'm not expecting them to ask 55 year after year after year. I'm looking, or my assumptions are that that 55 included a lot of one-off associated with getting the building and the programs up and running, again, fulfilling a promise that we as a community made decades ago.
It was just more than anything else. And that
Well,
was-
it was, but it's, like I said, we were fulfilling a 20+ year promise.
Yeah, I've been there
Yeah.
too.
Megan?
Mm.
I totally see what you are saying, and I agree with this, that part of it is the funding part of it. What I'm wondering is, and I think somewhere along the way, someone mentioned, are we gonna do reporting? Are we gonna ask for reports through this? Is this like something that we would do in the budget by itself and not through this community gift, program? But would we ask for what reports on what is that money going towards? What is it doing?
I think it's fair to have high level report. Whether it's through staff or through Community Watch.
I just feel like it, I don't remember, it's matter.
So it's not just money without any kind of report, because it is public dollars.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't wanna, burden them with knowing the type of organization and the capacity or lack of.
Yeah, let me pause that conversation. So some general reporting requirements seems reasonable. But then I'm not sure we answered Matt's original question is how do we treat Fairview Community Watch in terms of this process versus a contract process or any other part of the town budget process? What is our direction to staff?
I mean, to me, contractor budget makes sense.
So maybe in our next discussion, right, we're not gonna settle all this tonight, this is just the first round. So maybe at the next meeting, we come back with a clearer picture of which of these examples over the past 5 years would come through the process again in the future versus that we might have a long-term contract process or budget process where we address some of those needs. Outside of this year after year, apply again.
I think
kind of process.
just looking at over the past 5 years, the exchange park might be another one that could possibly fall into that category.
Agree.
Matt, does that answer, am I getting towards what you were asking?
I think you've answered our question on Fairview. That's, just internally, that's been something we wrestled with and was one of the, functions of this conversation is how do we treat them from a planning, perspective? So thank you for the feedback. I think we know what to do next.
Yeah. And there might be others.
Do we have any idea like what, how much maintenance, I guess the amount of maintenance is allotted towards the upkeep of that on an annual basis, upkeep of the community center on an annual basis?
I'm sorry.
What's the Fairview, do you have any idea like what the maintenance cost to upkeep the community center at Fairview is on an annual basis? Ballpark?
It kind of fluctuates. It's probably the cleaning. We have cleaning contract, we have grounds maintenance contract, we have roofing, HVAC.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably upwards of 20 to 30,000, and that doesn't include the upfits that Matt was talking about, or sometimes we use if there's small, like, things that need to be addressed. New light switch covers, new equipment in the bathroom, sometimes we use our budget for that. But it has been a fairly expensive building for the past 4 years.
Well, and I think it's important that we factor that in, or at least are we aware of what that indirect sort of cost is. It's a direct cost, but it's not something that's necessarily gonna show up on the spreadsheet.
And I can certainly get those numbers for you, like, as you get into the budget season and you're looking at budget requests. If you want to see what we have spent ourselves on the community building, I can provide that information line item.
Okay, any other questions on the funding amount section? We have other sections we need to get to. The next one is eligibility. Who can apply for community reinvestment funding?
I've got a question about that. I see that we state a 501 designation. Later on, we talked about the IRS tax exempt. Are we wanting to fund 501c4s, which have our political advocacy, or just 501c3s?
That's my question.
Or are we limiting only to those organizations with a 501 designation?
I know that in general, if I may butt in.
Yeah,
The 501c3 is what we're traditionally thinking of, not for profits. The chamber is not a 501c3.
that's right.
It's a
C6.
It's a C6.
So, yeah, we might want to limit it to others, so we don't have people we know we're never gonna fund apply.
Because that was, and because I can see if it's, those that can do political advocacy. That's
We can, yeah.
that's a conflict of interest,
Yeah.
and that's where that C6, C4, I don't know enough about C5s.
So maybe the next round you can provide us a cheat sheet on which, and we can define that at the next meeting.
Well, and I would say, a C4 is not just the political side, that there are limits to how much they can spend on elections.
Right,
The fact is C4s can be partisan,
yes, they can,
and
Yeah.
that's something I think we would like to avoid.
yeah,
I mean, frankly, so can C6s, but.
right, yeah,
that's a-
C6 and 2, I don't know enough about 5s and what they do.
So, Matt, were you gonna continue?
Oh, sorry, no, C5s are labor unions, C6s are.
Okay,
chambers
thank
of
you,
commerce.
I was like,
So in terms of eligibility, I'm thinking, yeah, they need to be based in Hillsborough or primarily serve Hillsborough, but there are maybe Orange County organizations like the Orange County Veterans Memorial that are they're in Chapel Hill, but we pay a representative portion of the need to fund some of those costs. So that's outside, So those are, kind of the guardrails of, Hillsborough serving our needs. And obviously align with our strategic plan.
So I think the current, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and to put a fine point out, I don't think we'd be interested in funding organizations that primarily serve, Chatham County or Pittsburgh, or, as much as we love them, we need to stick to our priorities. It may involve the county as a whole, where we're paying a share, but otherwise, Anybody else have thoughts or?
I am gonna. A point of consideration, not no hard opinions, but some of the home repair that organizations are highly active. Elsewhere, I know some want to be active here because of the need, but haven't been. They may or may not ever apply. I don't know how their capabilities or capacities match up with those we have experience with. But I'm a little queasy on not considering them if it serves.
I mean, they're doing the work in Hillsborough, but they're based in Johnson County.
Right, or they want to come in here because they
Yeah.
see a need or whatever, but may not have ever done work.
I say that would be permissible if the work to be done is in the
Okay,
town limits of
okay.
Hillsborough.
Okay,
Yeah, I think if the the residents of Hillsborough are benefiting from.
Yes.
Whatever the service. is.
Yes, okay, so what you were. I didn't hear clearly. I was thinking that if they hadn't done work in Hillsborough, they could be locked out of doing work in Hillsborough. So what I'm hearing, you were not saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it has to benefit Hillsborough, align with our strategic plan,
Yep, we're,
fine with.
yep.
Any other questions about eligibility? Okay, application process,
I have some
maybe we
comment.
can, I'm sorry, I was gonna say, does anybody, do we need time to review what is on the page before asking the questions, or are you ready with your questions?
Well, I've got, I guess, a proposal or something to think about. So the Orange County, Town of Chapel Hill, Town of Carrboro, all partner together in this process. And so I asked the folks that, from each of those organizations, well, you know, just to get the history of like, why isn't Hillsborough here? And they actually, none of them knew the history, so it's made me wondering, if you knew the history of why Hillsborough wasn't part of this group effort to get all of the nonprofits together, collect all of the nonprofit data, and then each organization or each municipality and government takes the information they need from this group process and then divvy up the funds. And maybe it was never presented to the town of Hillsborough to join in on this effort, but they use OpenGov, the Chapel Hill OpenGov, to collect everybody, all the nonprofit information. They, just last Friday at the Whitted Building, they pulled all the nonprofits in together into the same room, laid out all the rules, and then each different group came up with like Chapel Hill's like, well, we've got a little bit different right here, but that's our thing. And we've got a little bit different here in Carrboro, and we've got a little bit different here in Orange County. But the nice thing is the nonprofit, like, you're only putting your information in once. And then one of the openers that I think you mentioned was just that administrative part of going through all that. And here are 3 other municipalities that are, or governments that are putting it all together already. So my thought is, can we ask them, can Hillsborough join in, I guess, or, you know, or see if that.
I'm a little queasy about that, because I've had some, this was years ago, at least when I first got on the board about that, and part of the rationale, and Eric, I don't know if the information shared with me is consistent with your information though.
I don't know anything about
Okay.
this at all. Now, keep in mind when I say that, you may show video of me having it because people all the time will go, no, you did, you told me that, but I don't know anything about that. Matt looked like he might know. but-
Yeah, so I actually used to staff this for Carrboro, and it's run through Orange County Human Services.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, and maybe a distinction without a difference, but the funding focus is very narrowly tailored towards the human services officers. And so that may exclude some of the, at least it was.
It was,
10 years ago.
perhaps was, yeah,
And their current application still says it is, but they may be making other decisions.
yeah.
That I had, the information is consistent with what I was told, and the other consideration was that services were being tailored literally to a geographic area because of the abutment of Chapel Hill Carrboro, very similar on the collaborative resourcing that's already going on. Whereas we really do have a different environment, different resources, different it's just a different needs, even though we do share some common.
Yeah, no,
But that was shared, like I said,
I'm sorry, we've got more to get through. Did that answer your question? Do you
Well,
want to-
I would like to explore it a little bit more, because it's not so much, I mean, the agencies that are funding each of these nonprofits are not anymore just human services. It's all the county agencies for the Orange County portion. Now, I'm not sure how Carrboro might be doing it. I think the Human Services Department is running it. But it's just a mechanism where they're already pulling everybody together and they're already gathering that information. It might be some, you know, some of the administrative parts that could already be taken care of for us. And also pulling in those nonprofits. And then also the other part of it is it goes along our budget cycle. You you know, they start in December, the application is due in January. And they go through everything and approval with our approval process and or the budget. So anyhow, it's just something that I would request at least looking into and not dismissing it. But sorry, that mine's going off.
I don't want us to get inundated by participating that we could open our subs for
We'll
7
look at it.
million.
And come back.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving right along, okay, what else about the application process? Do we have questions or comments about the draft policy? The thoughts that's in my mind, Emily, is we want to make the application process simple and easy to follow. For a small town with not that many organizations that are going to apply, we don't want to give them 50 questions that they have to follow in the exact order or else they become ineligible. So
Well, if we do go through,
user friendly as possible. And also, what is the current deadline for requests for community reinvestment? And do we want to make any changes there?
We don't currently have like a stated time. It's just usually sometime in the early spring, late winter, early spring is kind of when we do it. And then it's not a set, like it's not like every year opens on January 1st and closes on a certain date. It just sort of depends on the year.
Okay, but it does culminate with us passing the budget process and we have, because I know there was one organization that we turned away because they were like way too late to be considered. So there must be some kind of deadline by which we say, sorry, you're too late. You can't be considered this year.
Correct. In the past, when we put out the applications, there's been a deadline associated with it, and then the agencies are invited to come to typically it's the April workshop. Actually, no, sorry. The May workshop to discuss the request.
but Mark, if we go through OpenGov, we will be subject potentially to all of those because having been part of project review committees of some of those funders that go through the OpenGov, when they see Hillsborough and Carver and Chapel Hill, the lights will go up, oh, we can get money from Hillsborough too. We will get a hell of a lot more of applications potentially.
In that process, it is pretty separate, so like you have to, cause I've gone through this process with them. And so it's pretty clear, like the nonprofit that I'm part of cannot ask Chapel Hill for any money, and it's clear in there
Okay.
that we keep anyhow, that's.
Eric, do you think it's reasonable that you might be able to give us some insight into the applicability of that to Hillsborough in this current cycle, or is that something that for next year?
It wouldn't be this cycle.
No, it'd have to be the
No,
next one.
yeah.
So you got 9 months to figure it out.
Okay,
Yeah, cause they've already as I said, they kicked off on Friday. They're off in the races.
Okay.
all right,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Um,
So I think a clear deadline for applicants, that'd be, both an open and a close for applications and something that gives them plenty of times to ask questions and if they need help.
And we mentioned the leverage in the previously going into this section,
Sorry.
the leverage funds that earlier we talked about as question fitting into this section.
in this section, learning about the audit and the capability of some of the nonprofits of doing an audit. Just wondering about that section right there. Again, in my experience, the nonprofit I'm involved with doesn't have the funds to do a formal audit. But so it's just something that I'm not sure. And we want to know that they're spending their funds correctly and all that, but doing a formal, or I don't know if you have more to say, but.
Oh, no,
Commissioner Hughes,
because, I mean, this is actually something that I did on the tourism board, which is when we had really big concerns about an embezzlement scheme at one of our area nonprofits. I flew off the hinges. I don't think people knew. I personally called the Secretary of Cultural Resources because of the nature of this organization and its connection to the state. I also called the state auditor personally and also asked like, hey, this person absconded with public funds and whatnot, and well, that didn't go anywhere, but I was like, but what else could we do? And so that's how the tourism board came up with the idea that if you're gonna be a contract partner, you either have to submit to an audit, either every year, or every third year, or that you are contracting with an external accounting professional to do your reconciliations and other things. I'm not sure about the Arts Council, but I know with Burwell and the museum, they went the route of, we're gonna do an external partner because the cost of that is so low. But I do know an organization in town that's about to do an audit. Their budget is probably only $130,000 a year. The audit is gonna cost $7,500. Without a lot of freed up general operating dollars in order to do said audit. So it took a little bit of time to raise that in order to do it. So all that is to say, there are plenty of small organizations that might suddenly wind up with $20,000 and haven't had an audit because they're so small, or wouldn't know how to fund an audit. If a nonprofit came to me and said, "Hey, Matt, you want to give $100?" I'm like, "Sure, what is it for?" "It's for us to do the audit." I'm like, maybe an exhibition of some sort. So I think it's very hard for organizations to come up with it. And so that's why the tourism board did what it did to split the baby. But it falls into the category of mo money, mo problems. When you have more money, there's a higher cost to it suddenly. And so I do like the idea of maybe differentiating the different ways that, you know, if suddenly you haven't had an audit, there's a way to still get them to eligibility. I don't know, Emily, if that second bullet point is, well, it's not in perpetuity because it does say it's a timeline detailing steps to have an audit. You know, I think that the third bullet point of, is it the third bullet point? I saw something in here about a financial review.
Yeah, that was, I think if that's what you're talking about, the third board, that would be prepared by a CPA.
Yeah.
But it's or the CPA review or the 990 copy.
Yeah, and so, so there's like there's three different types of reviews an accountant can do. You can do a compilation, which is basically you're looking at, it's basically a bank reconciliation. There's no real standard there. It's like, are your statements reflective of your bank records? Then you have a financial review. It's often cheaper. It's often quicker. Part of it is they're not doing a lot of testing. So that might be good. They're not doing a lot of internal controls. They're doing some, but not the full shebang. And then you have a full-fledged audit, which is often very pricey. And those nonprofits are running into the same problems we are with finding auditors that aren't super expensive. So there might be a way to finesse it a little bit. But I could see that being an issue. I could see that being an issue, to use Kathleen's example of Fairview.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Community watch, let me be specific.
Yeah.
Fairview community
Community
watch.
watch, yes. I do like the idea of having an audit for a certain amount, I mean, you know, off the top of my head, I think 20 grand, that's given our level of funding, that seems reasonable to me. I mean, unfortunately, we have seen more than one case of malfeasance in nonprofits in Hillsborough. It still blows my mind, but
I just had a ding ding.
oh, okay.
Emily, would it make sense instead of, and Eric, tell me this crazy idea too, because ultimately you're the conductor of this train. Would it make more sense in terms of, instead of looking purely at a dollar figure, 20,000 or whatnot, because I feel like that number might need to be changed over time anyway. The idea that Hillsborough would give $20,000 to a nonprofit 20 years ago would, you would have been laughed at.
That was like all we
Commissioner
gave,
Lloyd, right?
Total amount.
But would it make more sense to kind of have a gradation based on the overall budget of the organization instead? So like, if for some reason we had a $500,000 nonprofit that, you know, we give 20,000 or more to, a financial audit, hey, they should already have that, or that big, but they would also potentially have a much larger budget to absorb such a thing versus, you know, an organization that has a budget of 50,000 or maybe less. I don't know what some of the budgets of the folks that we've given money to in the past, but I think that takes, it's more equitable because it takes into account the amount of dollars they have available, how big their budget is. It could just be, this is just a really big lift for an organization, and, you know, taking into account how large their budget is could help ameliorate some of the overhead, especially when we say we don't want to fund overhead for that.
I think I would agree with you on that. And actually, one of the forms that I pulled on another grant for another government, it was $500,000. If a agency with receipts less than 500,000 does not have to do the financial audit, but more than would have to do a CPA full audit.
But
So
then I'm thinking that of the instances that have occurred in town, there wouldn't have been an audit.
Well, we'd have to adjust the,
yeah, I mean, this is just an example
Oh,
of,
okay.
of one government that's the number they picked.
Yeah.
But it goes, and I think that's what you're saying, is to use that number as an indicator versus what we're giving them.
maybe like 3 tiers, like less than 100,000. 101,000 to 250 or more, and then the top tier be 250 or more, something like.
I like the idea of tiers, and maybe Emily can come back with some recommendations with applying your professional knowledge to those requirements. And when I'm looking at the top of that page for the first table of who's gotten things, only 2 organizations would need to have that audit, and one of them probably has one because of the tourism board grants, so the Arts Council. So
They're the ones I don't know if they've done an audit, but I feel like they're the ones who probably have done it most recently.
I would assume, I don't know, maybe Megan knows.
Cause
We don't.
Arts Council did the tourism board TDA or
we can,
or maybe.
I know they do contract with an outside CPA, so
yeah,
I know they.
but I don't know about a formal audit. I haven't seen that from them.
So it sounds like the consensus is you'll come back with some options that are tiered and kind of easy to follow and not gonna break the budget, but keep us accountable for the tax dollars.
So one of the questions in the application process that I don't remember reading it before, so stop me if it is in here and I just missed it.
Okay.
But all these, and I'm gonna go back to, I don't know if we've completely settled on if we're going to ask for reporting, and the frequency of the reporting and what type of reporting. I don't think we've gotten to that, but one of the things in the application is because we have such a variety of nonprofits that are gonna come to us, and we don't know exactly what their business is nor what their program might be, we might not know exactly what to report, for them to report on us, to give us a good picture, like if one organization is aiming for this strategic goal and this organization is going this strategic goal. they're gonna be reporting out differently, I think. So one of the things in the application process that might be an option is for those organizations to tell us, this is the way that we're going to measure how we've used the money and how we've hit these strategic goals. And each organization will end up probably being a little bit different because they're all possibly gonna be in a little bit different category. So just some way that they're gonna say, we're gonna do this and our money's gonna try to change the needle here, and what we're gonna report out is that move. So that's something I think would be in the application process though, or what are those criteria? What are your goals, or what are that you're gonna be aiming for with this money?
I mean, so if I'm hearing you correctly, I mean, it sounds like, tell us what you're gonna use the money for,
Mhm.
tell us how you're gonna use the money, and then you tell us how you use the money.
Yeah, but in the application, I'm gonna give an example of, you're giving the organization $100,000. With that $100,000, they're going to have some metric that they follow within their own organization. And say, we're gonna move this metric from a 1 to a 5, being that's getting better. And so when they come back to report, it'll be like, well, did you get to a 5 or did you get to a 3? Did you get? And then there's criteria at each of those levels. It's-
Yeah, considering there's so many of the areas that they're funding that it's getting worse. So even though they may make progress, their metrics will not look good. So they will look like regress, not because the program's not good, but if you're talking about the greater need gets bigger. What you can do is say, this is what we planned, this is how we're gonna do it, and this is what we did.
Mhm.
But
I think we might be saying the same thing, like
Okay.
in that application, they gotta tell us what it is they're gonna be reporting.
Right, but the KPIs, what I don't want us to get hung up on KPIs that actually don't really communicate anything, so. For example. What would make sense with this program is we're going to build 5 houses. This is how we'll build the 5 houses. We built 5 houses. That makes sense. to me. We're going to build 5 houses. This is how we will, and we reduced the homelessness by X% does not make sense because of the problem has gotten bigger versus what they actually set up. Does that make sense?
I think
So one makes sense to me because this is what we're gonna do, and it's against, so the reporting is against what they said they were gonna do versus reporting about what we're gonna do against a bigger problem that they don't have control of.
And maybe, and again, I think, in the application then when they, and that's what I'm not seeing here is in the application is where they say, we're building 5 houses.
Gotcha.
And that's what we're gonna report on when we come back in first quarter, second quarter, like we got 1 house, now we got 2.
Yeah.
So that's just in that application, I think that's where that needs to
That
show up and.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, that reporting piece.
Well, and sorry. And I think that what would make a lot of sense in that and hearing y'all, cause I helped do this for 30 different grants at work. But I think clarifying, in the policy that then would be, look at you, Bob, but you'll probably be the one drafting up the agreements to some extent or reviewing them, is that the policy and any grant agreement or contract agreement stipulates that reporting will be based upon the proposal or the submitted and approved proposal. And I don't think you necessarily have to get into the specifics of that. They would have to go back to the proposal, look at, say, what, choosing their metrics and what they did, and being held to that, but it would be tied up in the language of the ultimate agreement.
Yeah, there's a program we do for another municipality, but that's exactly how we do it in the actual grant agreement. Refer back to the application, say, you're bound by the representations you made in this application. And if you don't accomplish it, then you may be in default of the agreement. So,
Like how we're gonna measure that, I guess what I'm thinking also is just that strategic item that they picked. How are we measuring that they did something on it? And was it significant? Was it not? We're gonna think about that at some other point.
But that's where, because our strategic plan there gets problems that they're essentially, we don't have control over. And if we don't have control over it, don't think it's fair to put it into the nonprofit as if they have control.
I think our primary responsibility is that they have to demonstrate that they're going to use these funds that support our strategic plan
Yeah.
for comprehensive sustainability. It's fair to ask them, how did that work out? But I'm a little nervous about making the reporting requirements too complicated, because somebody's not going to apply for a $2,000 grant if they complicated, qualitative, and kind of information they have to report back. So in the middle of page 242 of the packet, at the bottom of the section about application process, Emily has some recommendations there. Are we okay with those recommendations? Starting the submit a program or services description and a copy. Want to make sure that we're answering all of them. And suggestions that we have.
I think the rest of everything looks great.
Number 2, Kathleen, gets to your question.
Yeah.
Who else is funding this?
Did that, and just to make sure we add that leverage. In addition. But I'm happy with the rest, it makes sense to me.
I appreciate the second one from the bottom, about how many residents are being served. Yeah. It's nice to know. Is that $10,000 going to help 2 people, or is it going to help 150?
I'd like, if for that bullet, we could just verify actual number of Hillsborough municipal residents or service area residents.
Town residents. Bob,
Would you like to distinguish between the postal address?
right, it's not a Hillsborough zip code, it's a in-town Hillsborough.
You live, your organization is, or you serve people almost all the way in Cedar Grove, and they're not, depending on the type of organization, right? Because we had this conversation about the OCIM program. So clarifying who the resident is, and it could be for most of it would be corporate limit. The OCIM example is,
Water sewer customer.
yeah, that's different, but we're talking about tax revenue, not, in this case, we're talking about mostly tax revenue.
One item in this that, maybe a little clarification, only because I've run into this before. I like that we have the fiscal year in there, so that gives us a time frame. Now, if there is a program that happens reoccurringly, like every month, they do whatever it is they set out to do, yet they don't. They might end up counting people twice, or we count them once. So either this one person shows up at this reoccurring event over and over and over, all 12 times. Are they 12 people, or are they one person?
Let's let the agency decide.
Well,
I don't want us to get to that kind
It-
of minutia.
It has run into issues where some organizations have not gotten funding because of that one calculation. So it's just something, if we don't clarify it, we need to be aware that we ask the organizations, how are they counting?
I think that makes sense. I mean, if I think about not grant related, but RDU said, I think recently said they had like 10 million plus people come through their airport. How many times have I counted?
Exactly, yeah.
10 times in a year. So
And then it gets, well, what it does is it leads to the point of that some nonprofits, and we're not asking for this question, which I don't know if we have to or not, is when you're giving $10,000 and you say you've helped 10 people, well, that, there's one calculation, but if you counted that 10%, over so many times, now all of a sudden your dollar per person changes, so.
Well, and that's where the metric of it, like, I'll use RDU, 10,000 passenger trips or 10,000 people, what's the actual unit?
Mhm.
I think it's absolutely, we should be asking what's the unit to calculate, but I don't want to dictate their unit.
Oh, no, I don't think we have to dictate, we just have to make sure that the nonprofit tells us how they calculate it,
Yes.
or else we're gonna make assumptions
Agreed.
that are gonna affect that.
Totally
Any
agree.
more comments on this section?
Is it, the only comment I have is, what was that? Let's see, The renewal requests shall indicate the actual number of Hillsborough residents serviced. I think that may be a hard number for them to figure out in the application process as opposed to the expected number of Hillsborough residents serviced. Are they actually gonna be able to say in the application process, you're actually gonna serve 60 people?
Yeah,
And that's just for renewable stuff.
renewals,
Or was
and that
just
may be,
renewals?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
and this policy was sort of cobbled together from a lot of other policies out there, and so we still haven't really gone through and like really like cleaned up everything to make sure that like the language of agencies and organizations and other stuff is, that may be something that's like that, because there are some other statements in here that get it renewal versus like first time applications, and so maybe we only want to look at that information at the year end when they're doing the reporting, and we don't want to look at it during the renewal process. That's we may, so maybe already had that anyway. That'll be something that I guess we probably want to clean up a little bit. Is this just looking forward, or is this looking back in any way?
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, let's move on to review and funding process.
I think it's straightforward.
It might be good to say that in that middle sentence, eligible requests will be presented to the Board of Commissioners for funding consideration during their annual budget process. Lest someone think that this is a quarterly review that's done, or, maybe it starts January 1, anyway, just add a little bit more detail there, so their expectations are accurate.
Oh, and the successful funding awards. That would be like July 1, right? Do we want to put that in there, that it would start at the beginning of our fiscal year?
I think that's a good point. I just thought of something, it's called community reinvestment, which is, we going back to what you were saying about Hillsborough. If we clarified that it is Hillsborough Town reinvestment, I think that underscores as a nomenclature, underscores that it's for the town and not.
Well, what we don't want is someone thinking that a bank has given us money, because they do have required community reinvestment
Right.
dollars they have to do.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I'm hitting them up for a different nonprofit.
Just a question, and maybe it's obvious, but it's not obvious to me, so. We say eligible requests. Have we defined what makes you an eligible resident? I mean,
We did mention before that eligibility was, either they were, based in Hillsborough, serving Hillsborough residents. Or like no CIM, water sewer customers. We mentioned.
Okay, we say eligibility, organizations eligible.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to make
Five oh
sure.
one already. Preferred residents in their service population and or conduct a significant amount of their activities and programs within the town.
I just want to make sure that we're not asking staff to make too much of a discretionary call about what constitutes eligibility. That's all I really, I just want to make sure we're as clear as possible, so there's no gray area for you guys. You can say, yes, this is an eligible request, or no, it's not. The lighter the line is, the better off everybody.
True.
You know, and if it is that for an organization, you just happen to be a Hillsborough organization and you're eligible, then fine, you submit your application, you get moved on. Regardless of the completeness of the application, I suppose.
And.
Going on.
I mean, the statement says that the application has to be complete, they have to supply the required information. The completed application, eligible organization. Staff verifies that and moves.
And as a process, and I don't think this has to be here written down, I think it's just feedback for staff. That if it's not clear that they meet all the eligibility requirements, that y'all feel empowered to bring that to us to ascertain whether we feel as though the organization is within the policy. That way, the onus doesn't fall to y'all. And you have to make, oh, this is not a ball or a strike, maybe, maybe not, and then, you know, just provide that list and then that we can bail you out.
About the process, was wondering if we want to make it clear in this policy that, that these nonprofits, as they go through this process, will have our budget hearings at these meetings. Is that an opportunity for them to plead their case or give us as a commission more information about that? Do we want to make it clear, or do we want that open for them, or I don't know if we want to throw just something to think about.
It's a good question, because with an improved process, we're gonna know so much more earlier about what they're about.
But I think everyone would need to be given the same opportunity to come before us.
That's what I was wondering about, putting it clearly
Some are
in
not
there.
gonna, maybe not feel the need
They
to.
may not need to, but at least if it's advertised or this is your window to, if you want to, here's your chance, as opposed to leaving it open and then
Mhm.
that way the playing field really isn't level.
Cause there's nothing else in the process, right, where we, besides looking maybe at their forums or their, anything like where they get to talk to us about this.
They have very fast.
Yeah, okay, but if we wanna formally put it, so we know what's going to come up on an agenda, or, I don't know, if it's the 3 minutes of open
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry, you're talking about at a regular meeting before the.
Or, yeah, like at our budget hearing, or
Yeah, it
budget
should-
meeting.
I think it should be at the budget hearing, not out of sync with the budget hearing.
Oh, no, yeah, I was looking at the calendar, see which, like,
No, I agree.
like workshops or,
Well,
yeah.
3 minutes. Well, I don't like the
I don't
idea of pleading cases.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about how many folks could be applying, maybe on our agenda. I do think encouragement to be present should we have questions, and I think it could be kind of, I have a question about this, but you know, I would feel bad if an organization gets or has the belief they have to come to us and have PowerPoint and do their 3-minute presentation and everything, when really we would just like to be able to have a resource to say, hey, this isn't clear. Can you say more about this, this part of your application? And that can make you go one way or the other, because I've read grants where I didn't have the person in front of me to ask a clarifying question, and I've had them where I had that ability, and it did change the discussion, but if we're not looking to have it as a set aside special meeting or as part of a workshop outside of our normal, not outside our normal budget process, but just outside of when we're considering everything else, then, you know, folks may feel they're getting short shrift or that kind of thing.
Can I add something to that answers your question? And that is, I think the expectation should be that they're welcome to come and answer those questions, but I don't want us to make monetary decisions based on how persuasive someone's presentation was, or how glossy their PowerPoint was, or anything like that. Because a lot of these organizations might be small and they're not going to be accustomed to doing that, and I would hate for any of us to feel that we need to give more money to the slick presentation.
But the reason I bring it up is how the Orange County Commissioners do it. And they advertise, we're gonna look at these nonprofits and discuss this part of the process, their budget process. And then since it's on the agenda, that's when those nonprofits come up and do open comment at the beginning of the meeting for 3 minutes. And say, and it's not presentations, it's nothing like that, it's their 3 minutes and stuff. So that's just something that I've seen, and how it's happened is because it's on the agenda, they can come and speak, so.
I do happen to, agree with Matt, at least when I've conducted bidders. I really do like when we've got the information and we're seeking clarification. Again, it's just it's a level playing field, because just the way our brains work, when you have a minute, unless you've got some tools in place, you're going to be influenced. It's just the neuroscience.
I wouldn't want to see presentations at this point. I think we should know what it is they're asking. Like
Right.
the idea of asking clarifying questions. I'm ambivalent about the 3 minutes. I mean, we're gonna, most of these people, but at the same time, they might want a little bit of time to shine about what their project is or why this is different than the last time they were here.
Now, at the same time, just because it's open meetings, they would be able to
Yeah,
do it
they have
anyway.
a vote, right?
Yeah, so. So it might not be in the process, but
But they can still.
they can still show up.
And,
We can highlight that.
and as, from a process perspective, we sort of have done that in the past, when we like open up the process and we give them the deadline for when applications are due, we always let them know the board's gonna be discussing on them on X night, and you guys are welcome to come.
Mhm.
And we usually hear back, yes, we'll be there, no, we won't, or whatever, so.
And I think that's usually like what I've seen for Orange County is.
Yeah.
They say, this is the day, if you wanna come.
Okay.
So I'm hearing that it doesn't necessarily need to be in the policy, but just as long as we communicate that there's a date available for them to be available to you guys for questions.
I mean, I think it needs to be stated, given that we are asking so many things, I think it's fair to have in the policy that,
That they'll be
that they'll be
notified, the
notified.
date of the.
They'll be
hearing will
notified,
be discussed. And the other thing, and maybe just because there are two evils in the world that I think exist. One is when you don't get notification about a job that you applied to, and when you apply for money that you've not gotten.
we have to, yeah.
And I think on on that piece. And I don't know if it needs to be written, but for anyone that we don't fund and they're not here. And they don't have the intestinal fortitude to go watch our meeting that night, that. And I think it's however y'all see it, but like that we notify. Awardees, whether they're here or not. If they didn't get it, and maybe. Some reasons. Why, it could just be we exhausted the funds, please apply next year, or it did not align with. Da. But some way to provide that feedback so that if they do want to apply, they could be more successful in the next funding cycle.
I agree. To me, that's just common courtesy. It's, no one likes to be ghosted. And, it's also part of our public communication and our responsibility.
Let's not leave those applications on red.
Yeah.
Okay, so to be clear, it'll be on staff to actually probably provide that feedback. Eric, if you wanna weigh in on.
I mean, even if it's, I don't even mind if it's, if it's simple and you did not, and if you're interested in understanding why, call that, I mean, whatever is least burdensome, but at least acknowledging so they know, did I or didn't I get funding?
Emily, what are your thoughts on that process?
So there is already language in draft policy about that they will be notified as to the, these agencies will be notified of the outcome of their request. after board approval, the board adoption of the budget. But it does not have language in there about notifying them of why the funding status was made.
So how do you feel about adding the why?
I haven't been able to think this through. That could be that could be a big ask. On each, and you didn't get funded because of this. I mean, look how long this conversation has taken place this evening, and then we have all of these other issues. I think that we, just to communicate, your request was not funded, whatever it is we normally say. If somebody wants to know, they can ask, and it may be easier to have a phone conversation, or she go, why don't you talk to the town manager or the mayor or something like that. Putting that on staff when they're already buried and can't keep up with their work, we're just asking them to work nights and weekends and trying to interpret what's going on. So that's my 3 cents.
No,
on
that-
that.
That makes sense to me. It's like, I don't think it needs to be burdensome. You know, we talk about, we reserve the right to recapture funds not utilized according to policy.
Oh,
I
you
don't,
moved on.
I,
Okay.
yeah,
Are you
like
on the
that.
next section?
Yes, she is.
Sorry?
You're on the next section.
Oh, sorry. I got ahead of myself, sorry.
Okay, so
Never mind.
to put a bow on that, the last question, about the, decision process, feel free to, I'll volunteer myself. If you'd like more detailed information, contact the town manager or the mayor. Or whoever.
Well, would it make sense to
Eric's
contact the mayor so that Eric isn't buried with those kinds of questions?
We're probably not gonna get any questions anyway.
Okay.
And if somebody does, it's not a big deal. I mean, that's what I get paid at, is for when people will go, what happened? And I take my best stab at it, or worst case scenario, I'm sorry, if I did a bad job, go watch the YouTube video. Usually people want a short answer, and that's probably the limit of my understanding of things anyways.
Sounds good.
No,
Okay, distribution of funds.
oh, wait, I
I'm
have
sorry,
one more, idea of all the nonprofits and what they possibly could be in the budget. That would be in our like pre-budget workshop, or in our the big budget that we look at before we vote on it. So that would be out in the public realm already, and then they'd be able to say, oh, I got a 0 already, or I've got a 0 on my name. So they'd know before that last meeting that we vote on that. No. Or would it be like shown, or would it only show the ones that were awarded? I guess?
So the budget would probably only have a placeholder amount, whatever allocation amount we come up with, and then how that gets allocated would be at whatever board meeting that, usually I guess the workshop is when I think we're talking about doing it. So it would not be published in a document, not in the budget book itself, but we could have a document that is assembled after it's discussed and funding decisions are made that we could put out, if that's what you're asking.
I guess maybe I had a different idea of how the process was gonna go a little bit then. So are we here at our table going to be like, this organization asked for 10,000, like, yes, 10,000, or are you guys gonna come to us and be like, we think we can do this organization for 10 and this one? Is that? I mean,
I do not make, and this will be the 28th budget. I don't think staff has ever made recommendations
Okay.
on that. It's like Emily said, we'll say you have this dollar amount because this is usually a major policy issue. But I'm gonna make up a number and say that most governing boards spend 50% of their budget time on nonprofits. And even though it makes up less than 1/3 of 1%, and I say that to magnify how important it is to the board, the impact in the community. So we don't, we don't make recommendations on those specific amounts. Plus, we also found like it can create a lot of upset people if we're just randomly taking a stab, because the board, you're out there and you understand what's going on, and we're a little bit further removed. So
okay. Thank you.
On to the last section, distribution of funds.
be one lump sum that's, like, can't, like, after the contract is signed, you get the whole year, or if we do reporting, are we gonna say you get half of it? If we do 2 reports, you get half of it, and then you get the other half, or? we do
That,
one?
that really screws up a nonprofit, and especially small ones, their funding and how they can leverage.
Yeah, I'm not set on any which way, I just wanna bring up the question.
I've seen it done different ways. I've seen some places where they do 2 tranches, you know.
Yeah.
Other where they do it quarterly, most are 1 annual lump sum.
One,
So how do you recapture those funds at the end of that fiscal year?
I'll tell you the truth, usually you don't, but you gotta state your right to do it.
So, yeah, I don't think it's possible, but, maybe it would affect their ability to apply it next year. Or
Sure.
have something on the effect of moving forward,
Well,
because I don't think it's possible, really.
When you have non-performance with these and you have annual agreements, the real practical remedy is next year when they apply, they don't get anything, or they get less. And, that's the real kind of stick or carrot and stick.
Yeah, and the accountability's on it. Use their funds wisely.
Is that kind of the accountability to, like, if you wanna get a report back, we won't give you all the money until we get the report, I guess, so that might be the question on, are we doing reporting, and if we do, how many reports, is that kind of the impotence to, we better get that report in, or we're not getting done next.
Yeah, we're small enough, I don't think I'd want there, but I do wanna have a clawback clause.
Yeah, well, like, I guess I'm still not set on.
And,
like,
but in
reports.
terms of the reports, to me, that's part of performance.
Mhm.
And so, if they don't do, I mean, it's part of the requirements. And if they don't fulfill the requirements, they're in default.
Mhm.
And, so it's, performance issue and for us to contact, or at least if we would contact them, it's a performance issue, but yeah, they don't get money next time for sure. But I think the clawback, in my opinion, or at least my understanding of the language, it covers that, if the funds are not utilized, or if we say, if the conditions or the funds aren't utilized according to policy, or performance isn't doesn't fulfill the contract. That's the word I was trying to come up with. We reserve the right. Again, it's that clawback. Doesn't mean that we will do it, but I do like that we have the right to do that. And it just adds that if we have a report, that's part of performance. But at the same time, what we talked about earlier, I wouldn't want the report to be so onerous that.
I don't think we have any reporting in this either.
Not currently.
Okay.
I think there is one statement somewhere in there about if applicable could be added to the contract, but it doesn't specifically say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that we need to have some sort of a report of how did you do the money. I don't think it needs to be, again, onerous or.
Like, can you have that, a list of changes for the next year? Thank you. Okay. Other questions about the distribution of funds? Well, do you feel you have what you need for next draft? And I guess we should probably have a brief discussion on when we might want to see that next.
I was just looking back through real quick. So we've gone to the policy, and then there were on the agenda abstract, there were some key eligibility and funding considerations. I was just gonna read back through that real quickly to make sure that we touched on everything. Okay, so one of the questions we had was, the UNC, school of government had recommended not funding or not paying dues to specific agencies such as chambers, just because we're unable to verify that the money's being spent on the areas that we're eligible to fund. And so wanted to, I guess, get feedback on if the board's interested in following that guidance, or if would rather enter into a contract with them as UNC suggests, or if you have other thoughts or different approaches for that.
Well, they are, I mean, they do participate in political advocacy. They can be partisan. I mean, I think that goes back to the 501(c)(6), 501(c)(4)s. But then I wasn't a fan of us signing a contract with the chamber, just. I think that we can work with them in different ways.
Not sure I have a strong opinion one way or the other at this point. Can you repeat that, Commissioner Ferguson?
So if the chamber is a 501, I can't remember,
D6.
it's, yeah, no, but they can, the sixes and the fours do participate in political advocacy.
But so do C3s.
C3s are
No,
prohibitive.
they're not.
They
No,
are,
they're not.
You can spend like 10% or
It's-
20%.
It's not even that. They can publish voter guides, they can have forums, they have to do it on a nonpartisan basis, they have to be equal to all the candidates. But they are not bound from doing political advocacy, no, ma'am.
it's completely,
I work for a political 501(c)(3) organization, they are not.
okay, that's a change, that's a,
It's organization been around for
It says
decades.
me nonpartisan.
It has
yeah,
to be
they
nonpartisan.
cannot, yeah, you
It has
can't.
to be nonpartisan and they cannot endorse candidates, that is the only.
And chamber does endorse candidates, they do take sides. Like I said, and they have taken positions for against our board's position. And that, I think that you don't bite the hand that feeds you.
We also can't expect them to agree with everything we say do.
That may be, but if they don't have to ask, if they're asking for us for money, then the expectation is if you come to us to fund you, then support our positions. They don't have to come to us for money,
Right.
in which case they can take any position they want. And that's their right.
But isn't that where a contract would define those specific services or things that they're providing, where you can spell out the specifics if you want it?
I mean, again, it's a contract, but do you want to give money or contract with someone that takes a stand against what we are wanting to see, in terms of policy or positions from our perspective for the community?
Well, that's what you can spell out in the contract specifically, and then they can choose whether they want to.
Oh, okay, so I may have misunderstood. So you're saying in the contract, have language that would say you're required to support. Oh, I got you. Well, I would think we have the right to. I don't know if they'd like it, but we would have the right, I would think.
What are you proposing?
So if I understood his question and it sounded to me like his question was, if we could write a contract and with one of the stipulations being that in accepting the contract, you're also accepting the board's positions. So that they couldn't have, it would not be a case of advocating against what we, so we would not be advocating against one. Because they're accepting our funding.
I think it might be reasonable to say that you can't use any of this money for advocacy related purposes. They have to be dedicated to.
I was just saying, I was just
execution
saying
of the program.
that was what I heard his question to be, and I may not have understood correctly.
Well, I was just saying, like in here, for example, it says instead of this is school government, instead they suggest entering into a contract with the organization to fund a specific project, service, or activity. So if it's something that, that we are giving the chamber funds for, but we want, some return on investment or something specific, then it seems like a contract is an option, you know, to spell out those specific.
Gotcha.
You know, things that we want funded or not, I don't know, as of right now. We don't necessarily have that leverage, but that the contract might provide us with a little bit more.
Sure, you can put into the contract a specific use. It's like having restricted funds and unrestricted funds. You can say, we're gonna give you $10,000 this year to be used for some particular program.
But shouldn't all of them say that? Are we one way to
Well, I
get?
think that's where we're headed with this whole, I think that's the school of government's point. It is that they want to make sure that you're using, that our grantees are using the funds for services or programs that we can do ourselves.
Matt,
So I understand why the school government has this guidance, but I would also say we're a member of the of the league, as well as the National League of Cities. Those are also memberships. They may take positions contrary to what we would like to see, even though they are organizations of municipalities, but I'm also sure that our individual staff members using our tax dollars are also part of various professional organizations with memberships that may opt the entire town into the membership or just that individual staff member. And they too may take positions that are contrary to, you know, what we may officially have as our preferred policy position. I personally think that that is okay. Conflict, I think, has the ability to foster good conversations and dialogues. I think there's a value add to our chamber memberships, but what I think we could do to split the difference would be to see if the two chambers would be willing to have an MOU that specifically says, tied to our membership, that these dollars will not be used for A, B, and C. Maybe it's anything involving political action or something else that we may be more squeamish on, but doesn't put them through a contract process to get a $1,700 membership or the equivalent of a membership.
I think that's different from, you know, the professional organizations, the league and NLC are not taking positions of town operations. The chamber has taken positions in opposition of our land use, of our water usage, I mean, specific things of the town and our comprehensive strategy. That to me is a different animal than some of the broader issues where we have opinions about and we take a stand in, but it's not town governance, it's broader issues. So they may take a housing, well, we have interest in housing, we have policy in housing, but that's different from how is the town going to allocate its resources? And we're having someone that's getting significant dollars from saying, we want, you know, we're advocating to use it completely differently and rallying the troops than what we are trying to for, you know, that's to me a different.
But I also think you're getting into in my opinion, a First Amendment issue there. Where we're saying to an organization in exchange for receiving our funds, you can't deviate from our established policy position. That's restricting.
Yeah, that's true.
restricting speech.
No, that's definitely a no-no.
Eric,
Emily, does anybody know like what's our chamber membership amount? Oh, it is. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's right there. Okay, all right. I actually looked at it. Thank you.
1,400 for Chapel Hill and 6,000 for Hillsborough.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a gauge of you know, what's material, like $1,400 probably is material 6,000 maybe.
Well, that's some pluses, you know, the Hillsborough Merchant Association, is that also the chamber, Hillsborough Chamber?
yes, chamber is staffing there.
Yes.
Yes, and I would like to also figure out from Chapel and Carver what their approach is. to that chamber of memberships, because I know there's a difference of opinion.
And I know it's coming up at the county board of commissioners. And it,
Yeah, we can also see if their school of government has any examples. It'd be helpful to see, or they can point us in the right direction of like, oh, here's 5 examples of a sample contract with the, with the chamber that might be differently to give us some ideas, to help us come to an easy solution. So,
and let me qualify the conversation that happened at the county was that multiple departments were chamber members separately from the county, and the county overall is a chamber member, but several other departments were also chamber
Paying
members.
dues multiple times.
Yes.
But in that,
So more-
going back to what Mark, Matt was saying, that it makes sense then to do a contract for specific services.
I'd like to see some examples of that. I
Yeah.
think that would,
But the tourism board has contracts. for
Yeah.
specific-
Yeah, let's do a little bit more research on that. I will do some research and we'll come back. And I'll communicate that to you, what my findings are.
I do, quick question. The data that gets put into the state of the community report that we contribute financially to, is that in addition to our dues, or is it included as part of our dues?
In addition.
I think it's in
In addition to our dues, okay.
About 2,000.
Okay.
Emily, what's next?
In terms of funding priorities, I think we touched on this a little bit with strategic plan or the comp plan. But didn't know if we wanted to, if you were interested in having a specific guidance on what those funding priorities or are, if those are the priorities, or if there are other considerations. If we wanted a document or something that spells those out. If
Well,
it would be something
That's where
set in
the,
stone.
the Maslow, I keep going back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs, the most vulnerable. Basic, eating, pooping, eating, sleeping indoors is to me, takes priority over pretty much everything else, some fundamentals.
Yeah, so I think the reason we're asking that is based in large part on the conversation we had
Yeah,
last year, was it earlier this year? About, funding, the must-haves versus be nice to have.
Yeah.
Kinds of things, because we're seeing more of those requests coming through this pipeline that are oriented towards the must-have to be able to survive.
Yeah.
Especially on food access and other additional social services, so they could easily eat up the entire budget. So it made sense to maybe think about having different categories of community reinvestment opportunities, so they don't all get lumped into one category versus spread them out among multiple. But I'm not sure that we have that we're any closer to understanding broadly what are those must-have versus would be nice to have.
I mean, again, to me, fundamental. Eating, sleeping, peeing, pooping indoors. That's as fundamental as it gets. If we're turning away those kinds of requests. In lieu of nice to haves, which is, higher up on those hierarchy of needs, to me, that's a problem. Now, the question is, are we gonna allocate X, a percentage for must-haves versus percentage of nice-to-haves? I don't know, but I think there's some clear demarcations between must-haves and nice-to-haves. I think where it gets really muddy is in the nice-to-haves. How do you prioritize the nice-to-haves? Apart from the other considerations we put in, which I do think will help separate. Some of the players if we get multiples. But if we have all things being equal. And they're nice to haves, then that's where. you know, how many people are served? You know, what is those leverage? How is it gonna be, what's the multiplier effect in the community? You know, it's whatever those things I think are gonna have to come into play.
So,
Yeah, I think with the funding priorities, you know, I think as much as possible tying things back to the comprehensive sustainability plan and most of the possible requests I think we could get would be easily tied back to it, especially if the application required or asks like, can you point line and verse where this aligns with our, you know, the strategic direction we're going in as a town? Do I want to lay those out now? Whether it's the priorities or, you know, rubric, item, correct questions, framework? No, and the reason is we're changing so much of how we're doing it that we really need to start seeing what we're getting in first, and that's kind of what we did with the tourism board when we more formalized the process, that we didn't necessarily establish those priorities at first because we were making so many changes, and we tinkered with the changes over time. And the same with I don't know if y'all used a rubric
We did,
this year.
and we tinkered with it again.
But I think it's so much change to how we're doing it, that I think we need to kind of see what comes in first and kind of get an idea to how do people respond to things in order to do it. The other thing I would say is I don't know how in which a rubric necessarily is used and whatnot, but it's all public record. Is something to also think about. So I think getting through this process and seeing how it goes first, and then start to apply the rest of the kit together, I think gives us will give us some experience in order to come back, because we're really building something we've never done before.
Along those lines, I think I would just like a starting point, and this is just reiterating what you had mentioned, is at least be able to point to something in the strategic plan. That's gonna be like focus area number one, like priority number one. If you can't point to something, then you're not eligible pretty much.
I mean, I agree. I think that's part of the basic eligibility. It's got to tie back to our comprehensive sustainability plan.
Yeah, and then once we get people in or groups in, then yeah, we can fine tune that.
Yeah, it'll be appreciate the budget office being the gatekeeper for, you know, that litmus test of eligibility before it even, you know, comes to the board for consideration. Part of the, Kathleen, part of the kind of the realization of the topic of need to have versus nice to have comes from conversations from organizations who wanted to apply for the current budget year, but were too late. And the size of a lot of the requests would have doubled or tripled the entire budget for the community investment fund. And so that was one of the factors into helping us come up with, you know, the need for this conversation, to help us think systematically and align our processes with our strategic plan and comprehensive sustainability plan, so we can make the best decision, have the best impact with the dollars that we have to spend. So that was one of the things to get towards the end, just because coming out of the pandemic and things that are going on at a macro level, they're not unique to North Carolina, let alone Hillsborough, are the increasing needs of some populations around food and housing and things like that, that towns, municipalities of our size traditionally don't fund. So that was an influence in needing to have this conversation.
And I expect we will continue to get more and more, I mean, just on, you know, some of the other project review committees that I sit on, that, I mean, when it used to be, the request would be, you know, a little over or somewhat over they're coming in orders of magnitude over. I expect that's what we're gonna be having. But I also realize that the folks that come to government are usually the folks, we're the last resort. And, if we're the last resort of those basic vulnerabilities and the basic needs and we can support, not, you know, if we can support, I strongly believe we need to prioritize that. And I recognize there is no way on God's little green acre, we will have the resources to support the need that's out there.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so what I'm hearing is at this point, no rubric, just looking for tie back to the strategic plan or comp plan. And we'll kind of go through this next year, see how it goes, and then develop the rubric or guiding questions kind of coming out of that process.
That sounds reasonable.
That's good. to me.
Okay. All right, is there anything else that we have not talked about that we missed or overlooked or haven't touched on yet?
Making me use my MPA degree tonight. Just saying.
I'm wondering about some guidance on how much we're going to fund if an organization isn't well versed in how to calculate, we're gonna have this much possibly available out of the percentage of the general fund and asks for $100,000, and there's no way we're ever giving $100,000 to one organization. Do we want to give some kind of guidance, like the max funding is going to be 20, 25, 30, or even less, or that's an idea.
I think that's again where I get squirrely.
Well, one of the reasons I bring it up is in the tourism board, if we can't fund, let's say somebody asks for $20,000 and we can't fund $20,000, then their application is out. Like, there's no partial funding.
See, I'm on the boards, we do partial funding and I'm the right to do partial funding. I mean, certainly last year it didn't make sense to do partial funding. It, you know, you can't split a baby and expect.
And that's part of the reason the tourism board doesn't do
But-
partial.
But that doesn't mean that's true in all cases.
And that might tie back to like where we need that person there on the other side of the, over here saying like, well, we could do partial. And then seeing like, well, that doesn't help me at all, or.
Yeah,
Well, I think that I sit on the partnership for young children and we do partial funding. Now, part of that, and we're asking, some of those organizations are asking for similar amounts of money, like 50,000 or less. I mean, we're not giving out hundreds of thousands of dollars. But part of where we are able to make that distinction is a lot of the questions that we're asking here that Emily and staff have come up with, things like having organizational budgets turned in, knowing what their staffing cost is and other things. And then we are able to make a determination on that for possible partial funding if we don't think it's going to undermine what it is that they're trying to do. If it is going to undermine to partially fund, but we can't justify full funding or the funding's not available for it, then we may opt to turn it down. The Governor's Crime Commission, which I am part of through the Juvenile Justice Planning Committee, we don't do any partial funding at all because we believe ultimately, well, there's two things. A, we often exhaust the pot very fast because of limited federal and state dollars that come in. But then B, it could ultimately undermine the program. They ask for a specific dollar amount and we should probably fund that specific dollar amount if we can and it makes sense. So I think that we'll have the information to be able to ascertain whether or not to do partial funding. But part of it was you asked for 25,000, we can only do 5. I think we'll be able to see in our documents whether or not we can even do the 5 if it makes sense. So I think we'll have the tools to be able to decide that.
We might be able, what I'm wondering is if the organization on the other side is like, well, I can, you know, maybe they could rework their program to come down, like, we know we're never gonna do $50,000. and the organization asks for 50, but if they knew ahead of time that we were never gonna do 50, they could have maybe reworked their numbers to be like, it could
But
work.
they-
for
I
that.
think excuse me, I think we need to ask the applicant as part of the process, would you be willing to accept partial funding?
That's-
Let them self-select out of that process, that way our decision just makes it easier for us to be able to move on, and take that $5,000 instead of 10 and apply it to somebody else.
And that's exactly what I was going to suggest as well is, you know, what is there? What? If they would accept partial, and I think part of the application as a part B to that question is, you know, here's what you're requesting. But what's the minimum number for it to be viable? So we know how to do that partial funding. Not that we're going to say, okay, we're gonna go with the lower dollar amount, but to better understand. We can't give you X, but we can give you Y. Does that undermine what you're trying to do? If that's what we have to do.
Eric, did you want to say something?
Yes, please. I want to follow up on Commissioner Darab's other point, which is a good one, which is kind of like, what's the forecast looking like? And I think that's I want to walk through a few things that I think will maybe be helpful for the board. Because that's helpful if you can give them, or we can give them an idea, hey, it looks like we're gonna have bags of money that we can be giving away, then folks can be motivated and do that versus a very tight year. When we do our budget kickoff, the departments often ask the same question, similar, probably different approach. And there's some years like, oh, you know, things are looking better, we have more flexibility, or this is gonna be a tough year. And then they know that they can adjust their dial. Our general direction is if you have a legitimate need, again, it's different. Part of the budgeting is an education process. So, because I'm so far removed, so the board, you know, it helps us let us know what people need. So that can be a factor. But as far as like between now and the retreat, and that could be a budget, I mean, that could be a retreat discussion item is from the board because you control the gas pedal on how much money we're gonna spend. And just because things are tight, you can sort of change the rules. So, but just a couple things from looking, and you probably saw it, you know, between FY 21, we were spending $33,000 a year. This year, we're spending just about $125,000 a year. You've heard it say before, we're looking at over $1 million deficit. It's, you know, we raise a penny on that and it's like, oh, now we've got an $840,000 deficit. These are hard things to do. And so the board could say, I'm making this up for discussion point and for you to think about over the next couple of months. It's like, I don't know what Fairview is going to request. I overheard Commissioner Ferguson say earlier, like, oh, they may be asking less. So what if they went from 55 to 40? Are we going to spend another 15,000 in the Merchants Association? But even if the board says, hey, if somebody drops off, we're going to fill them in, backfill them with another need. Going from 30,000 to 100 and, you know, 125,000 is a dramatic increase in 5 years, especially if we're looking at $1 million deficit. And I've already told staff last year, I'm not saying we're not going to have any new positions, but you're going to have a really good justification, and it'll probably be the same thing going forward. That's the sort of paint picture of, I think it's really unlikely that you're gonna have like a large portion of money, and by large, I even mean $15,000, that you're gonna be able to give someone else. And you get the final say. I'm not advocating one way or another. The board may say, we don't care, these things are so important, staff go cut other things so we can fund more, that's fine, we'll do what you want. But just based on the numbers, that's, you know, something to think about between now and then to help you forecast going forward to the nonprofits and forecast the staff changes you may want me to try to coordinate to give you more flexibility.
Thank you. Good advice to always keep them.
Okay, let's move on.
Emily, do you have what you need from us? And do you want to prognosticate when we might see the next draft of the policy in January, February at the budget retreat?
I would think that it would probably, just with the holidays and whatnot coming up, that it probably, January workshop would probably be the earliest that we could get back to the board.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work that went into this and the 2 hour of very detailed conversation about the draft policy. So thank you.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next on the agenda is the item that I added, the ETJ discussion. This won't take long. So I attended the NC Mayor's Association meeting recently, and then the very next day, the league also put on a webinar called The Case for Extraterritorial Jurisdiction, at which they discussed the history of ETJs and kind of how North Carolina policy has evolved, and law has evolved over the year about ETJs. And then the conversation really centered around potential legislation in the next session that might impact the size and scope and scale of what the law says about ETJs. So they have asked for municipal input on how do we feel about ETJs? Are they useful? Are they not useful? What value do they bring and why? And so I'm being asked to complete a survey, and I was like, well, I need to talk to my town board. How do they feel about ETJs? So what I want to do is I sent a couple of attachments to you earlier in the week about from the league. And in the interest of time, I think what I would like to do is to ask, I would like to talk to each of you individually and get your feedback on that to see if there's a consensus about what our town's position may or may not be about ETJ, so I can respond to that survey. So that's the setup for this this item on the agenda. So any quick comments about kind of the need for this? And we don't have to go into too much detail because we've got miles to go before we sleep tonight. So
I will add that, at the NC Communication Regional Cogs, so Chris Wall, who is our, lobbyist, spoke to us on Friday and was, echoing, well, partially the ETJ is going to be impacted potentially on whether or not the House overrides, the veto of the disaster recovery bill with the downzoning. Now, he said as of Friday, and one of my questions is whether or not anyone has heard anything since then. But as of Friday, he was sharing that the Western states the Western House members were not, they weren't on board to override because they were upset with the disaster recovery money because of how it impacts receipt of federal funding. Didn't know, that's changeable. Don't know if that's changed because they'd have set the date for Wednesday for the vote. And the second piece is that the downzoning is specifically because of a specific developer with a specific situation in Durham and went straight to leadership because this is all coming from Berger and Moore's offices. It is not coming from the floor. So I don't know if anyone's heard anything else that's transpired, at least as of Friday.
I have none.
The only thing I heard is, more specifically, one of those three is not even talking to leadership about the override.
Interesting.
Read that what you will.
Yep. Interesting.
Okay, so without objection, I'll reach out to you in the
Yep.
next couple days and pick your brains, and please do read the 2 attachments that I sent you and give us your thoughts. And I'll of course talk to Eric as well, get the town's perspective. Okay. Thank you. Updates? Matt, you want to start?
Sure. Have just a few updates here. So, last Monday, I attended the Board of County Commissioners swearing in. Commissioner Darrow and Commissioner Ferguson was also there. I think Commissioner Ferguson left a little early.
Yep, I had Fairview's Christmas party.
I figured that's where you were. I looked around, I couldn't find you. Earlier tonight, I attended the Chancellor's holiday reception. amazing how much socializing you can do in an hour. But while I was there talking with various folks, I did have the opportunity to talk with Jennifer Player with Habitat for Humanity. And she told me they were just awarded $100,000 grant from USDA, specifically to do home repairs in Hillsborough.
Yay.
Hillsborough?
Yes. Follow that.
I know, you should, wow.
I just have a quick update from Water Supervisory Board that last week, they did vote to and correct me if I get this wrong, Brian or Megan, to eliminate the existing board as it stands. And wanted staff to investigate or research what an ad hoc board would look like. There's my sense is there's definitely members on that board that would be interested in providing meaningful feedback in the future. But as of today or last week, they didn't necessarily see the value of the existing board continuing in its current form. All right.
Yeah, I think that, and I think we had left it too, that probably our next action, instead of having another WASAC meeting where we rinsed and repeated that, would be have some sort of concrete proposal that the commissioners would vote on to direct staff to prepare whatever ordinance changes are necessary to enable that. And then that would be effectively what WASAC would be asked to look at is, does this make sense? Does this seem workable as an ad hoc committee?
I thought our consensus when we met was that while WASAC wanted to disband, we wanted to keep it, meeting at a far less cadence.
Mhm.
So I'm like going, hold it. Does this mean that what we were discussing was ignored by WASAC on what we wanted to see from WASAC?
I think what I'm picking up on both in the meeting and then kind of offline conversations with them is, it seems like we're kind of doing rinse, repeat the same conversation every meeting. And I think that their support, having a meeting about a specific topic, and we actually had a couple of items like the fluoride conversation and the lead conversation, just to kind of get some feedback, and they could see the value in being brought together for something like that.
Okay.
There was something specific, but it seems like when we have recurring meetings, it almost feels like we're kind of generating conversation topics and don't really have something we're asking to vote on. So that's kind of why they sort of came back the way they did. It's like we're happy to serve, we're happy to be part of the community, but certainly they're happy to continue to be water and sewer boosters. But I don't know that they want to continue to meet.
Well, it's certainly not the same. I mean, and what I remember is not meeting the same cadence, but we had talked about whether it's even quarterly or semi-annually. Something like that.
Yeah, what I remember from that too is we all expressed, that we valued their feedback, their opinion, and that, we all at some level found some sort of value essentially in them serving that capacity. I think them as serving in that capacity, they don't necessarily see or feel that same value that they're providing, is kind of the sense that I got. But yeah, so they vote in, it's literally a recommendation, but that's what they would like to do at this point. They're down to 6 members, there's still two out of town member vacancies. But I don't think there's been people knocking on the doors to necessarily serve in those positions. And you do have 2 individuals that will go off in a year, I think it's a year from last October. That have been on those boards for quite a long time and have served, served in their capacity very well. So it may mean that I feel like we just need to look at that purpose of that board a little bit differently, because it's outlived the original intent, I think, of what it was. And then as Brian mentioned, fluoride, so I think y'all aware that EP or the judge's ruling the judges are on, you Peter everyone?
Yeah, it's a federal judge out of California.
And currently, our, we'll basically have a wait and see, sort of approach. But that, they'll continue to, provide fluoride in the water until future decisions made.
I hope so, because I know that some of the contested about fluorides based on studies that have been invalidated, bad science, bad statistics, it's bad data, and the basis of bad policy.
That's all.
Okay, so did the tree lighting on the 29th, and I've already mentioned the Mayor's Association and the ETJ discussion and the follow-up webinar from the league about ETJs. There was on December 6th, there was an MPO rail subcommittee meeting, and I attended that meeting remotely. They looked at a strategic rail infrastructure investment study. It was kind of in two parts. The first part was about rail projects in general and funding mechanisms, and the second part was kind of a visioning exercise with the subcommittee to see how they felt about kind of what the big picture is and where investments might need to be made in the future. And then the holiday parade was yesterday, which was awesome. The legs are still tired from that. Good to see everybody there. And I had to walk to town hall to pick up my car today, and I felt like it was a dream. Because the streets were quiet and everything was going on, and it was less than 24 hours ago. Yeah, so it was a great event. I really appreciate it. That's all I have.
So the updates that I have, we had a tourism board meeting this last week where we heard updates from our contract partners for their quarter 1 reports. And then on that board, we have a vacancy that's coming up, so a food and beverage taxpayer seat, if anybody has any feelers they want to put out for that seat.
That person,
Sorry?
who's going on?
Very sorry. I can try to see it. He's actually already off, his term is already up. So we have the vacancy right now. And as Commissioner Hughes mentioned, I attended the Orange County Board of County Commissioners swearing in. And also the chamber event yesterday, which was great. They did a wonderful job bringing the community together like we did. It was great to see so many people from Hillsborough out on the street. I also just wanted to mention, because I know we have another staff member that was deployed to Western North Carolina, and it just really means a lot for the employees to take time away from their staff or from their homes and their families, especially during the holidays, and to give that to the people that are in need out there. So really want to thank them. So that's all I got.
I actually have a bunch. So yes, I did attend the early part of the swearing in, not the actual swearing in, because Fairview did have their annual Christmas party, which was wonderful as always. I'm had a meeting with the mayor of Rollsville, who with me, we both are involved with the forum. He's the alternate delegate. Well, I'm the delegate. Well, one of the things he shared was they have a buzzard problem. They also get permits from US Fish and Wildlife. It's a permit that's issued once a year where they can shoot buzzards within town limits. But it is a permit you have to request. We were told to contact Congresswoman Pushev for assistance if need be, but it's the US Fish and Wildlife. They have whatever hoops they require, but it is an option. Don't know what the restrictions are, don't know anything about that, but when he shared that, I wanted to share with us, given our issues. The forum I mentioned, we did meet. One of the things that I was captivated in, the meeting itself was in Pembroke, but the dinner and then entertainment, if you will, was in Laurinburg. one of the things that Laurenburg has done is, if you've been to Laurenburg in the past, there's not much there. Or it used to be where it was very dead, very depressed, small town. Big issue of brain drain, kids leaving, not coming back, not even for the holidays. And so there were 4 women over wine decided we are going to change this. 8 years later, what is occurring? It's an annual event called 'Tis the Season. It lasts for a month, but in addition to this, it's Sip and Shop. They close off DOT Street twice a month. On a, I believe it's a couple days or 3 days a month. So it's, twice a month. So like Thursday, Friday, Saturday. One time in the month, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, a second time in the month. And it's a social district, Sip and Shop. And in the Christmas, they decorated the windows in the shops. They did not have the shop owners do it. They did. They got founded. The help that they got from the town was Public Works, putting in additional receptacles, electric receptacles, because what they have, speakers, which plays music all year round, and lighting, to make that available. And it is absolutely spectacular. They have the dancing Santas, and every year additional events and happening. And what is occurring now is that this little town, where they had massive building vacancy, they've only got 1 or 2 buildings that are vacant. And one of them was being worked on, as in they were, literally the contractors were doing their thing while we're there. They're drawing people from South Carolina as well as around. So they did partner with the chamber, but again, I was really struck. They decided to go at it independently and work with Public Works, and of course, by doing that, working with the mayor and their board, who was supportive. But it's turned into every year an amazing, and what had occurred to me is some of the things that we're trying to do in our community, that it really is grassroots. And this Laurenburg is a great example of that. So I wanted to share about that. The other thing that was for the meeting is relevant is the Upper Coastal Plain Cog is on the forefront of AI use in public sector. So in a fairly recent survey, over 50% of public sector employees are using AI personally. Only 2% of governments actually have a policy. So I have a policy that was created by the Upper Coastal Plain Cog that was shared with the UNC School of Government's using it. So I have that, and I will share that with you, Eric. The other thing that they have done is he has created a generative AI app for Area Agency for Aging on caregiving. It is based on the ChatGPT 4.0 plus platform. He's putting together an academy, but he does have 2 books written for public sector use. There's only 3 authors, and there are 4 books out on public sector. He is on national AI, so it's really exciting, but it's something that in the private sector, the speed is fast, but this is real about having policy. And to give you some ideas, there are real examples where communities, local governments have used, the employees are using AI, and employees that are not meant to get sensitive HR information do, because they put sensitive information into ChatGPT, things like that, or Not understanding that, Copilot will vacuum your computer under circumstances, things like that. So there's a real need to have policies out there. And at the same time, very powerful is Greensboro, Raleigh are already starting to use it to help residents with questions. Does not replace people, but it gives a way to extend capacity. So anyhow, like I said, I will share the policy template and the information in the books, and like I have this one it's literally a 30 day, and one's the intro deal. And a PowerPoint to go along with that. Also, wanted to share. And that app, that generative AI app, it's called Ask Ashley. Right now, it's available only for the caregivers of the Upper Coastal Plain, but there are plans to expand. Right now, he's piloting, so more on that. Also, the association is partnering with civic local foundations to collect donations to help with Helene. And along that, having Nathan Ramsey and the executive directors from the Western NC COGS. I don't know how much you follow, but there's been a lot of misinformation, but there were boots on ground from local municipalities and from the COGS immediately. And they are the COGS and the directors and the electeds from those regions were extraordinarily thankful for all of COGS local governments that are continue to provide the support. So with our folks, they're seen, they're known, they're welcome, but to hear it directly from folks affected, I mean, I'm just really moved by how much has been provided and continues to. There's also some environmental and climate justice community change grants and some grants for heavy duty vehicles. I don't know how that fits, but I know within our clean energy where we're looking at clean energy. But I'm gonna tell, I don't know.
Feel free to send them on.
I said, this says it funds replacement of class 6, 7 vehicles with zero emission, and the class 6 and 7. Some other stuff. I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
But I'll send it to you.
We'll find out. Yeah, happy to look at it.
And anyhow, so I will send that on those grants. Next, the housing subcommittee on the COG. I'm chairing that. It's a group that includes developers, elected officials, nonprofits. One of the things we'll get ready to do our charter, but the preliminary and speaking with staff is the end goal is to have a regional housing plan that fits within the Vision 2050 plan. Again, this is not to replace individual municipal plans, but it's to have what our wish list is that our plans actually talk and communicate and collaborate with one another. So we don't repeat what Cary and Apex did with their planning on density, which was completely in the dark, and they went against each other, and had they spoken, it would have been a lot better. And last but not least, I was invited and have accepted to be in the Red Team instructor apprenticeship program. So with that, once I'm through, I will be able to teach groups and have the graduates receive a certification, a Red Team Thinking certification. And OpenAI, there's an article about they have been doing red teaming on OpenAI and ChatGPT. So that's my stuff. A bunch happening.
Thank you.
I have nothing.
Town manager, anything else?
Two quick things, and then Jen, they're actually in Jen's area of expertise. We got $100,000 cybersecurity grant. If you want any details, it's for cybersecurity stuff.
Yay,
And I guess Beth did that.
yay, yeah.
All right. And then we do have an AI, go ahead.
We have some draft guidelines that we've created. The state is also working on some guidelines, and so we were waiting to, because the thought was that what they come up with may help supplement though.
They don't have any users though. That's the only thing. It's the folks on the state level are academics. They don't actually, they're not using it. That's why I'm gonna send you the policy because
Yeah.
it's respecting real life.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're certainly happy to take a look at all the resources that y'all have. And we were also going to be piloting, Microsoft Copilot once that's available to government.
Be aware, it vacuums up you be very, very careful. Robert Hyatt can go into detail, but that was the caution, do not use Copilot at all, because it's too much of the sensitive information that's going out there.
And we can, kind
Please,
of do that as part of that,
please reach out, because like I said, he is the guru of public sector.
yeah, and one of the things is like, with the different, one of the benefits of the Copilot is the different settings that you can kind of sensitivities, but we'll look into, I'll reach out and get.
Yeah, I will do an introductory email, but don't do anything, because we got a download and it was freaking scary.
That's it for me. Okay, thank you. And staff reports from the packet and accept a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Linda.
Is Evelyn, second? Thank you. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, we'll take maybe a 5-minute break before we get started.